The security of the oceans is paramount to humanity. Indeed, oceans are not only important as the platform on which it performs the transport of 90% of goods that sustain the world economy, but provide resources of various sorts, living and non-living, that support the livelihood of people on land today and for the future generation. Several activities that guarantee life on land are performed at sea. Therefore, order and security at sea is one of the core pillars for ocean sustainable wealth generation, which has been threatened by illegal and criminal activities. How we can develop the sector for Africa's prosperity and long-term development are some of the sectoral issues that will be on the front burner on Maritime Radar. I'm Nneoma Obi-Asualo. Africa's rapidly evolving maritime security environment has prompted innovations in Africa's maritime security architecture, leading to greater regional coordination. Insecurity at sea makes it difficult for states to secure trade routes, protect and harness the benefits of their blue economies, and ensure economic growth and social development for coastal communities. The maritime smuggling of drugs, oil, antiquities, charcoal, ivory, and other goods facilitates transnational criminal networks and funds them. Weapons trafficking fuels conflicts around the globe. And with more private armed activity at sea, the line between state and non-state actions is blurring when it comes to maritime security. More effort is needed to create inter-regional cooperation on maritime security. Before we get into today's episode, let's find out the latest in maritime news.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
The Lekki Port Free Trade Zone's chairman, Abiodun Dabati, has said that contractors are set to hand over the Lekki Deep Sea Port on Monday, October 31st, 2022. Barring any last-minute changes in plans, the Lekki Deep Sea Port, the nation's first and only deep sea port, will commence commercial operations on or before December 20th, 2022. The Customs Area Comptroller, Papa Command Yusuf Manlala, says the command collected 790 billion naira between January and September 2022. Yusuf noted that the command improved its revenue collection profile by 29.8%, up from the 609 billion naira collected in the same period in 2021. The Lagos State Waterways Authority, LASWA, says it is partnering with the French Development Agency, AFD, to provide an improved water transportation system in Lagos. The General Manager, Oluwadamilola Emmanuel, disclosed this in Lagos during a courtesy visit by the agency to the LASWA headquarters at Falomo, Lagos. The visit, which is to kickstart the preparatory study of the AFD-wide LAG project, will provide the required expertise for inland water transportation, develop and improve water transportation in Lagos, and encourage the upgrade and the use of bigger vessels on the state's waterways. Emmanuel noted that the loan for the project will be provided by AFD and would help ascertain the required number of ferries and terminals needed for the whole process. The CEO of the Port of Rotterdam Authority, Arnold Castellin, said in the first month of 2022, the container sector of the port decreased by 8.6% in total weight and by 4.4% in the 20-foot equivalent unit volume at the port. The port, which is the busiest box port in Europe, handled 5,752,000 TEUs from January to September 2022. According to Arnold, due to the war in Ukraine, container traffic between Russia and Rotterdam has almost come to a standstill, and this has significantly significantly impacted on the container figures of the Dutch port, as around 8% of its container traffic was related to Russia in the past few years. Although the macroeconomic climate does not look promising, transshipment volume from 2022 are expected to be at the same level as in 2021.
Africa needs its own storytellers, people who understand the continent because they're from it. People who know that news is more than just a conversation starter, it's our stories. Because these stories run deeper than headlines and segments. It's about digging deeper to get the facts and telling the human side of every single story, not just the echoes from foreign headlines and perspectives. It's time to take back our narratives and share them in our voices. The birth of Africa's New Age reporting, and this is where it begins, right here at News Central TV, with stories that put Africa first.
This is Maritime Radar. This week's episode is to applaud the tremendous positive work happening at the national, zonal, international, and regional levels to curb insecurity on our waters, and a call to pull them together to form a whole of Africa's approach to maritime security. I spoke to Emmanuel Maiguwa, a maritime security expert, on the maritime security in Africa. Stay with us. Protecting the African oceans and its resources is important considering its potentials. What discussions or conversations should we be having around that?
Thank you, Nneoma. As you're aware, the ocean holds massive resources ranging from hydrocarbons to other mineral resources, to fish, to also holding the biggest mode of transportation, which is shipping. And all these activities provide wealth for the littoral states, which are those that we call the coastal nations. And they need to be protected. And there has to be various instruments strategically designed to ensure that these resources are protected while coordinating them into a whole.
The surge of these activities you've identified came with some challenges, some security challenges. What are the challenges you've identified in our waters, looking at Africa, and what solutions will you prefer? Identify them and the solutions.
Well, so majorly in Africa, we are burdened with piracy. In the Niger Delta, you can talk about agitations from the communities, which are political. And in Africa, we also are burdened with the trafficking of drugs and narcotics. West Africa has been identified as a transit destination or a transit route for narcotics coming from South America, mostly. And these are all issues for shipping. We used to have kidnapping of crew, theft of cargoes, hijack, and all that. So these are issues. There is also the IUU, which is the illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing activities. It has not taken prominence in West Africa, or it has not gotten the attention it's deserved in West Africa. Perhaps because of the major issue of piracy, which has overshadowed. But it's a big concern.
Well, considering the laudable Deep Blue project and the information that the IMF has removed Nigeria from the piracy list, how do you think that project has fared? And do you think we should duplicate it in other countries in Africa?
Okay, so I think you are referring to the IMB designation of Nigeria as a high-risk area. I don't think it's an issue that we should relax on, and I don't think it is solely the deep blue asset that is responsible for that. The deep blue asset is yet to be deployed, but there, as you may have read over the media, there's been a lot of effort by the Nigerian Navy in collaboration with also other foreign navies, as well as community relationships, which is a tactic that has been deployed by the Nigerian Navy in trying to deal with the issue of piracy. And yes, we have zero piracy incidents in this year, which is a good thing. But for me, as a maritime practitioner, the environment is still a high-risk area. For the crew who are coming in with foreign ships, because the moment they enter our water, psychologically, they know they are in a dangerous environment. This is not good for shipping. This is not good for the seafarers. We are still paying the war risk premium as well. So if we look at the issue of maritime security, we have to look at it. We have to define it first. What are these security threats that we have? So for maritime security, you have the ship and the port facility. Regulations on how to administer security measures on the ships and the port facility has been put under the ISPS code, which was domiciled inside the SOLAS Convention. And this becomes the responsibility of the maritime administrator to ensure that this international regulation is domesticated into our laws so that our law enforcement agencies can enforce that. But that is just security measures on the ships and the port facility. What about the maritime domain? What about the seas, the coastal areas, the inland waters? What instruments today are we using to ensure security? That is not the responsibility a nation should give a maritime administrator. Because in protecting this environment, you have to understand that these are our borders. And today, the only competent government agency that can and is in a position to ensure that the maritime domain is protected is the Nigerian Navy. But the question is, how have we empowered the Nigerian Navy to be able to do this? I'm not talking about empowering the Nigerian Navy in the areas of assets, ships, and all that. First, you have to empower them with a law. The Armed Forces Act is clear. Give Navy certain responsibilities. But you have to recognize that the Act give them, use two words that are very important, which is enforcing and assisting in customs regulation, enforcing and assisting in immigration regulation. Right now, this act was enacted sometime in 1994, but in the 80s, NIMASA was established, and NIMASA was given this role of SOLAS. There was no ISPS, and it was okay for one to assume that because the Navy has been given that responsibility within this environment, then the Navy should deal with it. But when ISPS came and gave the responsibility for security measures on the ships and in the port facilities in terms of developing the framework and enforcement to NIMASA, the Armed Forces Act is supposed to change in making sure that it has added that responsibility, just as it has done to the Nigerian Customs and Nigerian Navy, so that the Navy will enforce and assist NIMASA. So without that, we have a conflict. A competent agency which can go as far as covering where the Nigerian Customs is not able to. And don't forget, when the Navy is assisting in enforcing laws like that of the immigration, it is supposed to be done within the laws of the Nigerian immigration. So how is the Navy now going to assist in enforcing the laws of ISPS. By the way, we have not domesticated the ISPS in the first place. So if I violate the provisions of the ISPS, you will not find a punishment for me, aside simple, if I'm a company or I'm a ship, a simple refusal of granting me a license of compliance. And then I lose money from paying high insurance premium because I'm not complying. But this lack of compliance can lead to loss of assets, can lead to debt, loss of life. People need to be punished. The architect of the ISPS, on the day the ISPS was signed, which is the United States, signed their own Maritime Security Transportation Act. And they landed the ISPS on that act. The act is wider. It covers other areas of maritime security concern that the United States have, that other countries may not have. You cannot make that as part of the international regulations. When developing international regulations, you have to put minimum standards or requirements to enable everyone comply.
So do we need collaborations in Africa, looking at the background you have spoken on?
Well, we have been doing some quick fix all the time. The Yaoundé Code of Conduct, which is a good thing, but it's a quick fix.
So what will you advise? What should we be doing? What conversations should we be having around that?
What we should be having today is to have...
Looking at a short term and a long term.
Is to have, in the short term, issues like that have always seen response from government with some kind of joint task force. A joint task force that will have a clear mandate, a clear organogram, and on what to do on the short term. And you have to understand the threat. So the threat in the waters are threat of trafficking, human trafficking, which is immigration, drugs trafficking, which is the responsibility of NDLEA. You have customs, export and imports violations, which is the Nigerian customs, and every other agency that you see here. Then you also have the DIMASA who is doing the ISPS. Then you have that competent agency in terms of capacity, which is the Nigerian Navy, which can lead this coordination. And so that when they approach a ship or an environment that is violating immigration regulation, there is an immigration officer.
So what has been the role of technology in all this?
Well, first of all, the technology is useless if you don't have a process. So you have to have a process, a manual process. Everything you do in technology starts.
So we don't have process, we don't have technology, and we are not implementing.
The technology is the easiest part of it. I think what is important is
the process.
The process. Let us do on the short term. We can go on this task.
So how can we go on this journey?
Well, for me, I will feel in the absence of this regulation that's clearly specified or added this responsibility to the Navy, we can go on a task force, and that can come from the leadership position. Put the Navy in charge, set up a task force, that they will work together. But then there has to be a timeline. That says this task force is to exist for 1 or 2 years, pending when the act of the Nigerian Navy will be amended. And before you begin to amend the act of the Nigerian Navy, I will strongly advise that we have our Maritime Security Transportation Act, which will take into consideration the ISPS and every other maritime security concerns that we have, legislate it, get it passed, and then define who does what.
Most African countries lack policies for ocean governance. Do you stand with this submission?
Well, I wouldn't say so. I will say we lack coordination. You see, shipping in the first place is an international business, and one of the reasons why the IMO exists is to prevent countries from adopting unilateral policies and regulation. So whatever we do in line with IMO conventions and regulation. So as a country, we have what is our interest. We also have the Africa Integrated Maritime Security, Maritime Strategy, which is helping in coordinating all these African countries to come together. Yes, Nigeria will have her own interests or her own areas of priority, but what is the priority for Africa? It needs to be identified. So as we pursue our own priority, we'll also be able to recognize the interests of other countries and Africa at large. And yes, there is that effort being done, being put in place.
How can we in Africa improve for the reason of this discourse? How can you, as an expert, how can we improve in our security challenges? How, bullet points, how can we improve? Because we've just identified the issues and, it's as if we are not making headway with what we have.
Okay, I think one thing we do in Africa, we play a lot. We have a lot of experts, but we are not using them. We have professionals that, if you go to Australia, you will find a lot of Nigerians in Australia working for the Australian maritime administrations and different agencies. If you go to even the United States Coast Guards, you will find some people, even some of them were trained by our famous Maritime Academy of Nigeria. They are working in the US Coast Guard. A lot of them have things to offer. Shipping is international. And from the regulation, from where we adopt our laws to how we enforce this, we have to put the experts, the appropriate people in the right positions to be able to drive this. And we have to accept that in the maritime environment, there is no quick fix. You can't make changes in the maritime environment over a short period of years. So you need to have a long-term plan, and you need to ensure that experts are there driving this plan to success. This is all that I think we lack. That boils down to coordination.
Coordination. For the indigenous ship owners to thrive in this cabotage regime, I'll take that again. For the indigenous ship owners to thrive in this cabotage regime, you will agree with me that dispersing the CVFF must be implemented. What will you advise?
Oh yes, I recently published an article on this issue of CVFF, and for me, it's clear. The law is clear. Collect this money and disperse this money. But why haven't we been able to disperse the money? You see all kinds of arguments and counter-arguments as to where, how, when, and how it should be dispersed. And currently, the CVFF is lying in Central Bank under the TSA, which is against the Cabotage Act. The Cabotage Act specifically states that the money should be domiciled in commercial banks. The central bank is not a commercial bank, and that is violation number one. Now, the intent of the fund is, as you have mentioned, is to develop indigenous ship owners. Develop indigenous ship owners means develop local, our own tonnage in coastal trade. So we have to, first of all, develop a framework. The fact that the law says you, a citizen of Nigeria, should qualify for this loan and did not specify the model, type, design of ship you should buy, it doesn't mean I should just carelessly give you the money and you're free to buy any kind of vessel you want. So there has to be a study, as I have said, a study that will go and see what is our area of comparative advantage that will ensure that we develop. Don't forget, we also, for you to develop the tonnage, you have to develop your seafarers' capacity. Because if you don't have competent seafarers, you will not be able to manage those vessels efficiently. So you have to make sure that the vessels you're buying are going to be suitable for the seafarers' development as well. And then you have to also ensure that the companies you're giving this money are competent in managing ships. We have tried this method before in the 70s, where companies took money, they bought the ships. But by now we're supposed to see the companies leading. Where are they? So these are the issues, and this is where the framework, the law will not tell you that. The law doesn't tell us anything. Our constitution doesn't tell you when to eat and when not to eat, but it's expected that you should eat. So I think for the interest of the country, we first need to identify these areas and encourage people that this is where the country wants to invest in. And then everyone that qualifies according to the Act should access these funds. There's no magic. Disbursing these funds is not magic. It's just there has to be a commitment, there has to be a strategy, there has to be an understanding of what we want as a country. Otherwise, the money will keep accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, and no one is.
Wow, this is a fine place to end this chat. We must put the right people and follow through processes to ensure security in our waters. These are the words of Emmanuel Maiguwa. He is a security expert and the president of Maritime Security Providers Association of Nigeria. Many thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me in there.
And this is where we draw the curtain on this week's episode. Every week, join us on Maritime Radar as we explore how Africa can unlock the latent potential of its maritime industry and its connected sector. You can also expect the latest in maritime news and industry insight right here. I am Nneoma Obi-Asualo. Many thanks for watching.